This will be our last lecture of this semester, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to tie in some of the ideas that we've been discussing over the last couple of lectures with religion and religious extremism, and then connect it to what artists are doing, and then give you some food for thought as we think about moving beyond this course and this semester, so that you can then think about framing art and propaganda as you move forward. We've been taking a look at religion and the loss of religion that we see in this contemporary world, and this is a growing trend where people are no longer becoming affiliated with organized religions. And as a result of this, generally what we see is that people are turning to other ways to try to find meaning, turning to other social movements or social ideas, and how that is then trying to fill the void of what religion is seeking to do. And generally, what we've noticed in this class, one of the main themes that we've been taking a look at is the notion of identity and how propaganda plays into that, investigating who am I, why am I here, and where am I going. And propaganda generally tends to be pretty heavy-handed in telling people who they are in the world. And we've examined how nations also have done this, telling groups of people who they are, this creating this sense of identity and nationalism and patriotism, this feeling of a shared culture, a shared history, a shared language that makes people feel united. We've also examined how race is part of this idea of identity, telling people who they are and how they're supposed to behave, and gender is another component to this, telling people who they are and how they're supposed to behave in terms of men or women. And as we move towards the 21st century, a lot of those ideas have been thrown into question. We see a loss of nationalist sentiments as people start to see nations using propaganda, using this idea of nationalism in order to justify wars and bombing groups of people. And so it's turned people away from these nationalist sentiments to a certain degree, right? There's still some of that out there, but to a certain degree, we're a lot more skeptical of what our politicians are doing and why they're doing it. And we definitely see that called into question with race, where there used to be these clear boundaries and clear differentiations between what races are supposed to do or not supposed to do, and we see that called into question with the civil rights movement. And then we also see the ideas of identity being called into question with gender and the women's movement in the 1960s and 70s, where women are starting to question, well, why is it that men get to define what womanhood is? Why can't I define what that is? And so we see these other social movements happening, and they're all calling into question this notion of identity. Who am I, and what does that mean? And then we have that kind of mixed in with the loss of religion. And so what we have within this contemporary world is a lot of uncertainty about who am I and what does it mean to be who I am within this larger community. And so what we see is a lot more uncertainty. So people are turning to other social entities in order to find that meaning. And to combat this loss of religion and loss of nationalism, you do see some movements that are happening that are extremists, that are pushing against that trend, and that becomes attractive to some people because when you're living in a world that feels uncertain, there's something that comforting about certainty. And so you do see a rise of extremist movements. One very extreme one that we examined was the jihadist movement, which are fighting against this idea of globalization and the focus on conformity. But then you also have, other movements, the Westboro Baptist, another kind of extremist movement that is fighting against these notions of ambiguity and uncertainty. But then you also have other social movements getting away from religion that are filling the void that with the loss of religion that we see today. Other social movements that are happening that produce the same sense, right? They're kind of filling that void of what religion does, of that idea of identity, giving people labels in order to say, okay, this is who I am. And so we see that often in society where people ascribe to certain labels of defining themselves, and that then helps them to feel a little bit more sure about their identity and who they are and how they relate to the overarching world. And we've examined a couple of those, social movements that fill that void in, that help people to feel a little bit more connected through defining that sense of identity. But what we also see happening within the world is this tension. We talked about this before with fundamentalism and extremism, and this has a wide range, right? This narrative, we talked about the narrative of fundamentalism last time, which has a wide range. It has anything from the jihadists on one side to more of the Christian fundamentalists with the Westboro Baptists on the other side, both having fundamental roots, the same type of narrative that we need to go back to our roots in order to find some type of pure essence that we have lost in this contemporary world. Because as we've noted, the contemporary world feels pretty uncertain and ambiguous, and that produces anxiety. And so the fundamentalist idea is let's remove that and let's go back to an earlier stage, this kind of nostalgic look towards the past. And there's certainly a lot of, certainly less dangerous, but there's a lot of social movements that pick up on that trend of fundamentalism, that narrative of going back to something because we are uncertain of where we are today. So we want to go back to some earlier point where we can then find more security, more stability, and so we definitely see that. And we've talked about some of those trends that are happening simultaneously to the loss of religion and the loss of connectivity that we feel, that we're now looking for other means in order to feel connected, in order to be more sure of who we are and have more solid footing, that we see as a trend in our world today. And certainly what we see in relationship to this with the loss of nationalism and loss of religion, those certainly were two very powerful entities that were able to define who we were. And if you remove both of those, then you have this loss of certainty. So I want to take a look at how art is responding to all of this loss of connectivity, this uncertainty, the dogmatism that's kind of filling in that void that we feel. And I want to take a look at minimalism. And minimalism is an art movement that is seeking to do a lot of this, and it kind of bridges the gap here. Some of you may be somewhat familiar with minimalism as far as either fashion designs or of decorating, or there's even a social movement out there, and the social movement actually does follow the fundamentalist narrative, which suggests that, I mean, according to the minimalist narrative, that in the modern world we become too materialistic. We have too many possessions, and these too many possessions are creating a lack of happiness. And so, what we need to do in order to find ourselves, to find this certainty in the world, we need to get rid of all our possessions and live a very minimalist life, and then we can feel happiness and certainty within the world. And in some ways, that social movement is influenced by the art movement, which happened much earlier than that. So I want to take a look at the art movement it's doing something a little bit different than the social movement, and I wanted to talk about that so you can see the difference between what minimalist art is seeking to do and what minimalism as far as the social movement is seeking to do. All right, so here's my academic definition of minimalism. It's an art movement that arose in the 1960s that strips art down to its fundamental elements, kind of that idea of fundamentalism. Let's go back to the roots, the origins. Is a reaction to abstract expressionism. This would be the works of artists like Jackson Pollock, which explored the inner mind of the artist. And what abstract expressionists were seeking to do is to go deep within the self, the inner mind, the inner thoughts, the inner feelings and emotions, in order to find oneself, right? And again, that's a very similar idea of trying to find who am I in the modern world. What does that mean? It's a search for identity, but also the abstract expressionists, as they're searching for themselves, they believe that if they can find themselves, they then can share that message with others, and then others can find their own way, find their own identity. Minimalism seeks to distance the artist's mind and ideas from his or her art, and so it's a little bit different than abstract expressionism, because abstract expressionism says if we turn within, then we can find some element of truth that I can teach you to find your, kind of own journey on your towards truth. But minimalism is mainly about the artist trying not to impose his or her ideas. So in that sense, it's a reaction against dogmatism, right? This fundamentalist, extremist ideas that are happening to kind of fill the void of the loss of religion and the lack of certainty that we feel. Often artists place the audience and or viewer as the central interest of the work, becoming part of the work itself. And so part of the work is whatever the artist constructs, but the other part of the work, the other half of it, is the viewer who comes and experiences the work, right? So again, similar to abstract expressionism, as they're inviting us into journey or journey inward in order to find some type of meaning, to find who we are and how we relate. But it's not as though they're imposing that idea. It's just we're becoming part of the work. We're investigating it for ourselves. This encourages the viewer to come to a new understanding of art, himself or herself, and or his or her environment. And so in some way, minimalists are seeking to do that, seeking to remove their own authorial biases. They're not necessarily trying to impose an idea onto you. They're just providing the parameters for you to be able to experience this for yourself. Let's take a look at the first minimalist artist that I want to share with you is Walter de Maria. De Maria focused on the literal aspect of nature. As minimalists sought to remove ideology from art by eliminating form, textures, shapes, light, space, movement, and time, De Maria focuses on the natural world. To remove the artist from art, really all you have left is nature. And so again, they're trying to remove art down to its very basic essence. And if you remove everything from art, then all you have left is the natural world. And so he says, this is what my art is going to be centered on. One of his works, it was called Earth Room, is 3,600 square feet loft where he added dirt. And so it's just a big kind of studio upstairs. And then he just puts in a room full of dirt, probably about up to your knees, maybe a little bit higher, of dirt, and that's the artwork, right? And so in some ways people are like, well, that doesn't really, that's not really artistic design, or it's not really artistic insights. But it's not necessarily, again, about his artistic design or his artistic insights. It's about creating an experience for someone to be able to think about the world differently. It is designed to be experienced. One must go to feel and experience it with his or her senses. The work gives us a greater sense of time and space. The viewer can feel and smell the art and know how one's hearing changes. And so as you get closer, as you walk up the stairs and you get closer to it, the sound starts to change as the sound starts to be absorbed by the dirt that is upstairs. The viewer is an important aspect of this work. He brings the romantic landscape to the urban world. And so again, he's bringing the outside world to the urban world. And it's a very similar idea that we saw in a previous lecture where I gave you the quote by Lyndon Johnson, where Lyndon Johnson says, in this modern world where we become too urban, we're creating an ugly America. And we're losing that connection to the natural world. And so he suggests that as we lose that connection to the natural world, we're losing the ability to feel, we're losing the ability to feel happiness and joy. And so Walter de Maria kind of picks up on that idea and says, well, let's reconnect people to nature. And so he does that through his art. However, there is no expression of the artist's emotions. It's not as though Walter de Maria is saying you have to feel happy about this or you have to feel a certain way. It's not as though he's trying to say this is a commentary on environmentalism. He's just suggesting this is an experience I want you to be able to go through so that you can find yourself, right? So again, it's a little bit different than those social movements that promise you happiness. If you do this, you'll be happy. You'll know who you are, right? Whatever the social movement is. And there's millions of them out there today. But he's suggesting what I'm trying to do instead is I'm trying to create an experience for you to be able to find yourself on your own, right? Which is a different kind of context. His more famous works, or his most famous work is his lightning fields. And what he does here, I think this is in New Mexico. He puts metal rods out in the middle of a field and he waits for a lightning storm and then he takes photographs of them. And the idea here is for us to be able to see and experience the awe of nature to a point where we've gotten to a point where we really don't really think about the natural world anymore. It used to be, as we lived more of a rural lifestyle, more agrarian lifestyle, nature was a very important part of the human experience. But in the modern world, in the urban environment, we don't really think about, natural elements that much at all, right? We think, well, I need to bring an umbrella if it's going to rain, but we're not that tied to nature, and so we're losing that connection. So he's trying to find that for us once again. So another artist doing something similar but kind of in a different way is Robert Smithson, and his art focuses on earthworks. That's what he calls them, reconnecting us to the environment. His works generally have large proportions that are designed to allow the viewer to interact with them. He wants us to reconnect with our natural surroundings in a similar way that Walter de Maria is seeking to do, creating the experiences for us to be able to then come to our own conclusion and understanding of identity. This is his most famous work. This is called Spiral Jetty, and he actually did this one, interestingly enough, in Utah. And it's still there to this day, and he does this one on the northeast shore of the Great Salt Lake. And here's the map that I give you if you're interested in this. It's just north of Salt Lake, kind of a little bit off the beaten path, but it's a major artwork. And so if you're ever kind of feeling adventurous, I highly recommend going out there and seeing it and experiencing it. And here you can see people that are walking through the spiral jetty. And so what he does, he takes a bunch of stones and he just kind of creates them in this human-made shape, right? And so something that's not natural, but it does have a natural component to it, right? Is that the spiral is something that we see often within the natural world, but he's connecting that idea of nature with this human creation. I took my family out to it a couple of years ago, and it's kind of interesting. It does kind of have an interesting connection to the environment. And when he created this in the 70s, he never thought it would last, the 40 years that it's lasted. Because he thought that with the Great Salt Lake being there, it was just going to kind of wash it away, and then it would just kind of naturally erode. But due to environmental factors, due to the loss of water, and then the global warming, climate change, that has led to this actually enduring much longer than anticipated. So, what's interesting about this one is. So this was the kind of the shoreline at one time, but now the shoreline, in order to get to the shore, you actually have to go way out. I think it was like right out towards here, which is several miles now away from the original shoreline. But as I walked down there, I was able to kind of experience this and think about it and reflect on what this actually means. And so again, I was part of the work as I went there with my family. This is my daughter standing at the center just so you can get a sense of the size of this. And this is my youngest son, probably getting ready to throw something at her. But if again, focusing on interacting with the work and connecting us to the natural world in a way that we normally wouldn't, and getting us to think about what that actually means, right? As we think about how am I connected to the natural world? What is my place within this? Taking a look at another minimalist and this idea of collectivity. Richard Serra is another contemporary artist that's out there doing similar ideas, although he has a different kind of focus to it. What he does, he displays banal images of the contemporary industrial world in unusual ways. And so rather than connecting us necessarily to nature, he connects us to the urban world, to see the urban world differently, to reflect on it and experience it in a new way. There is no political or social agenda to his works. So again, that's similar to a lot of what minimalists are seeking to do, to remove themselves or their ideology from the world or from the work. Because what we see too much today is too much ideology. Everyone telling us what we should do, how we should be, or what our identity should be, or what label we should pick up and define ourselves as. He wants the viewer to interact with his art. He indicates, quote, "Space has become my subject. It informs how people think about what I'm doing. Art is meant to get the viewer to come to a new understanding of form and space." In One Ton Prop, which is one of his works, Serra holds a 1-ton cube with a metal rod. The viewer feels danger because it seems as if the cube could fall at any given moment. If you just trip over the rod, it feels like that 1-ton 1-ton cube is going to fall on you. It's mainly about how the viewer interacts, touches, feels, sees the work. His tilted arc was in New York City and was 12 feet high and 20 feet long. It was designed to get the viewer to become more aware of its form and space. However, it was quite controversial. People didn't like it. They thought it was too ugly, and they didn't like having to walk around it, and so they actually voted to remove it, and so it's no longer there. But one of his more recent works is something called Bands. Provides a very similar interaction. Bands twist and contort for 70 feet. And the idea of bands, it kind of feels like it's a rubber band. He just kind of takes scrap metal and he twists and contorts them. And it gives a random and threatening feeling so that we are more aware of our space, right? Each space has a new bend or twist causing a disorienting effect. And so this is his 1-ton prop, which he just props up the cube against the wall, and then it gives it this sense more of danger. But the idea is for us to interact with this, to think about our space differently. And as we think about it differently, then we start to really reflect on who am I? And we stop becoming passive objects that are acted upon, and we start thinking and realizing that we are agents to really act and to think for ourselves. In a similar way, he does this with band, and this is just kind of an overview. This is a bird's eye view of what band is, and this gives you a sense of its size. And so it's relatively tall, and this is a colored view of the band itself. And so it's the scrap metal that twists and contorts, and each one of them has its own kind of cave that you kind of walk in and feel sometimes it's feeling moving towards you, sometimes it's moving away from you, to give you kind of a new experience. And this is Richard Serra talking about band and its importance.
The 3 Serra sculptures in this gallery were conceived and built for this room. They were brought in through a 40-foot door that opens onto the empty lot next to the museum, and each weighs between 100 and 200 tons. This one, called Band, snakes horizontally for more than 70 feet.
This piece unfolds its curvature in a new template. It has nothing to do with any of the pieces that have come before. It's totally different vocabulary. What I'd like you to do is walk the entire piece. You can walk inside and outside continuously if you like and never stop. There are 4 volumes and they move in and out, and the piece moves in and out. There's a shift between inside and outside that seems continuous. And there are some spaces when you go into, you think you've been in before, but you realize you haven't. And you sense that they're similar, but they're all dissimilar. It's difficult to tell one space from the other. The entire sheet of steel, as it undulates through the space, changes continuously. And its interior exterior is continually exchanging.
Sarah says that the sculpture creates new spaces within the architecture of the room.
Look, if this room were empty, it's like a field of space bounded by these walls. But then when you walk into a piece like this, you're just dealing with sculptural volume, not the volume of the architecture of this room.
Sarah worked out band in a series of inch-to-a-foot scale lead models.
I built band in models for about 3 years, and then I built it in the steel mill, and then I went to look at it. And it was definitely a new experience, and I didn't know what to make of it for a couple of days. It wasn't a question of quality. I didn't understand the space of it, and that surprised me.
Finally, Sarah felt he had a grasp of this sculpture in its newly created form.
Thought it was better than I thought it was. You know, when you're looking at 40 years of work, you make distinctions, and I think this is as interesting as anything else in the show.
Sarah was asked if band would lead him in new directions.
I think it already has, yeah.
So again, the main idea here is that it's not just about the bands itself, it's about the people going and experiencing it and finding, right, investigating the art and investigating their place in order to understand where they're at within the world. And this is one that was similar to band. This one I came across at BYU Provo at their art museum. They had this called Windswept. And what you have here is these are like millions of little twigs that are wound together in these weird kind of structures, and then you're invited to kind of go in and to interact and experience it in a similar way that we see with Richard Serra's bands. And one thing that I notice about this, even though it's felt kind of in some ways kind of homey, it felt like a little kind of Ewok village or something like that. And then but in another way, it felt kind of a little bit, I don't know, anxious as well, because you're seeing something that seems somewhat familiar, like the homes, but then it's kind of woven together that makes it kind of feel a little weird at the same time. And so it was kind of an interesting experience. But I noticed the smell of of all of the twigs. It had this kind of earth smell to it, which gave me much more of a sense of space within it. And this is me just taking out my cell phone and walking through the experience of this. But again, much like Sarah's bands, it was about us going through and experiencing the work of art for ourselves. To investigate, to explore, that's what artists are seeking to invite us to do in this world. We're meant to explore rather than, again, allowing other entities, these other social movements or other, extremist movements that are out there, or fundamentalist movements, whatever the case may be, to tell us who we are. They're inviting us to think for ourselves and to come to our own understanding. And so sometimes people get frustrated with this contemporary art, which is doing this because they want there to be an overt message. They want people to tell them, well, what am I supposed to get out of this? And how am I supposed to think? Or how am I supposed to feel about this? And the main point for the artist is you're supposed to get out of it your own experience. And to some people, that's a little bit frustrating because they want that, certainty. They want that authority figure to tell them what to do and what to think and how to behave. But what minimalists are seeking to do is to move away from that. And I wanted to leave you this semester with the works of Christo and his wife, Jean-Claude, and what they're seeking to do to get us to think and interact with art and this idea of collectivity. They mainly are concerned with connecting people to art by providing new insights into ordinary objects. And we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about this idea of their collectivity. I like to start my discussion of Christo by taking a look at an art project that he did in college when he was in art school. This was his senior project that he submitted, and what he does is he takes a bottle and he puts some canvas around it, and then he wraps it in twine, and then he submits this as his work. And so again, he doesn't really make the work of art. He doesn't really make the canvas. He doesn't really make the twine, right? He just kind of takes these three elements and pieces them together and creates this new experience. So again, it's an ordinary object, and as the professor saw this particular work of art, he didn't really understand it at first, as most of us would be pretty confused, seeing a bottle that's simply wrapped and not knowing what to do with it. And he knew that Christo was a great artist. He knew that he was kind of this prodigy, and so he's really confused why Christo would just do this. He didn't know if he was just, lazy or ran out of time or whatever the case may be. But the more he thought about it, the more it kind of clicked what Christo was doing, taking an ordinary object such as the bottle, the canvas, and the twine, putting them together to find new meaning to something that's quite ordinary. This is his most famous work that he did in the 1970s, called Running Fence. And so what he does is he puts an 18-foot cloth fence for about 24 miles that goes across the Northern California landscape down to the San Francisco Bay. And what he has to do in order to do this is because this is going across several cities, it's going across several counties, it's going across several ranchers' land. And so what he has to do is he has to go to every single city, has to go to every single county, and he has to get permits. He has to go to every single rancher and get permission in order to put this fence on their ranch. And as he does this, you can only imagine what a rancher would think about an art fence, right? So as he goes there, he's like, "I want to put a fence up on your yard," and he says, "Okay, that sounds good. I have a lot of cattle out there." And then Christo says, "No, not a wire fence. I want to put a artsy cloth fence up there." And you can only imagine, their kind of reaction to that. It seems kind of bizarre and unusual, but as he continues to work with them, as he continues to interact with them, not only does he get their permission, he gets them out there helping put it up. And so, kind of an interesting idea that he's pulling together here that I wanted to talk about a little bit more. They did a documentary of this, of his project here, and from its conception to its completion. And I wanted to show you just a clip of this to show you just a taste of what he goes through. And this is something that's indicative of every art project that he does.
All a bunch of garbage.
Wait a minute, what's about
That's art? Some lousy curtain coming through here with a bunch of city slickers looking at it? What the hell with it? I'm against it. I think it's stupid.
This guy's spending $2 million, $2.5 million in a county of Sonoma, and he's not thinking anything out. He's put money in here.
That don't mean, what kind of art is that? What art is that? Hanging a piece of rag up for 50 miles. I can hang a rag up. I bet he can't even paint a picture. He's an idiot.
It isn't art. A curtain 10 feet long and 18 feet high is not art, and it's not art if it's 24 miles long.
I know something about art. I've enjoyed it for 50 years. I agree not to talk about art because I don't think it is art. I don't believe it's art.
Christo and Jean-Claude, nice to have you back in Petaluma. Scoot in a little bit closer so we can hear you talk on the radio.
Good morning.
We're just chatting while Newscope was going on, and I heard that you got some bad news yesterday down in Marin County. You want to tell us about that?
We have the public hearings, and the commission denied building permits. And the most basic discussion was by the commission that they doubt an artistic quality of the project. Everything we apply, about the ecological issue, about the technical feasibility of the project, everything was accepted by the commission.
And for the safety?
We appeal already in Marin County, and we can have Board of Supervisors to review our appeal the next 2 to 4 weeks. They accept also.
But they don't accept that it is art.
I'll bet you $1 right now that I can go out and put your curtain up, and I won't have a complaint. Now,
But he is a great
You know why?
Because you're a great politician.
No, because everybody in this country knows me. But when a stranger comes in, they're just a little skeptical. They don't understand. See? No, that's right. Now, you just stop and think about that a little bit.
So this is him going to go to one of the ranchers that he has to get approval.
Perhaps he lives here, you know. I think he touched mafia. He lives here. And like,
Did we put this letter together with this contract?
yeah, first we start to talk, John, before I put the letter.
But where is the letter?
Letter is with the contract. Yeah, it's letter with the contract, but I don't think we should give him the letter now. I think when, I don't know what kind of man is. Now the cow, very careful.
You know, if you kill a cow, we can go home.
Back to New York. Very cheap.
John, now careful.
Very inexpensive project.
Very careful.
If you put them in September, everything is dry.
Yes.
You know, if people they go back and forth, you know, if there was a lot of people to go through there, you know how people, awful, some they're not careful at all. They throw up a cigarette.
Yes.
Everything on fire.
Yes, exactly.
That's the only thing.
And you know what, Mr. Balatori? I am just as scared as you of those people. Because this is our running fence. Everything we have in the world we put to build it.
24 hours a day to watch the fence to the all public intersection. The fence is designed that will be seen only by public roads.
And that gate will be locked and we will have a guard.
No,
which
look,
is more than is now.
First, I tell you, here's that project, look.
But they're going to be awfully
Awfully what?
anxious to get down to see where it's coming out of the ocean. That is
this is the...
But this is the point.
Ocean Marine,
We cannot open it to the public.
The thing is that I don't know if Mr. von Schottenstein is aware of the fact that first we are in a very big rush of getting the signature from Mr. Titus.
No, we have the copy of the contract.
Yes, I understand that, but could you help us by reminding Mr. von Schottenstein?
Write letter. Send confirmation. Write letter.
Thank you. Bye. Tomorrow we will call.
Tomorrow.
He's not in today.
No?
And of course she has the phone number. They're all
They was aware about him? So
yes, but she didn't realize it was urgent. Okay. Bye.
Kill. Ridiculous. Dennis, don't tell them.
It's urgent.
But what kind of law is this, people? She don't know that it was urgent.
Yes. Put it back here.
So here what you see is Christo going to, Christo and his wife Jean-Claude going to city hall meetings, going on the radio, trying to get government officials to return their calls and to get permits, or going out to the people who are going to put this up on their property. And the struggles that he continually faces, and he's constantly facing opposition, and it's an ongoing struggle. And so, as you think about that, right? Why would anyone go to all of the trouble to do this, particularly since this is only going to be up for 3 weeks, right? Running Fence was up for 3 weeks. They put it up for 3 weeks, then they took it down, and then it's never replicated ever again. And it cost him in 1976, it cost him $3 million. And if we fast forward that to more contemporary dollars, 2015 dollars, it's about $12 million for him to do. And so then the question is, why would someone do this, right? Why would someone go to all of this effort, go to all the trouble to try to go to people and talk with people individually? And part of this, what I want you to think about is, I want you to think about if you're going between Rexburg and Pocatello, just every day, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and all of a sudden you start to notice that the landscape, right where you're at, starts to kind of disappear. You don't really notice it. It just becomes kind of white noise in the background. But if all of a sudden one day you're driving back and forth, and one day you see an 18-foot cloth fence that's going off into the sunset, what would you do, right? Most people would, probably pull over, they would stop, they would take a look at it, and they would start to wonder why it's there, who put it there, what's it doing, right? How long is this going to be here? And you turn around and you notice that there are, 4, 5, 6, 10 cars, whatever the case may be, that are also pulled over, wondering, questioning, and thinking about what art is. And they're all of a sudden in the middle of an art discussion. They're thinking about whether this is art, whether it's not art. And that's what you have within the town hall meetings, right? You have the people that are complaining that this is not art. I agree to not talk about art because this isn't art, right? The idea of hanging a cloth isn't art. But they're at least talking about art, right? So you have people that generally would never go to a museum or never really would have an art discussion. They're actually coming together collectively to talk about something, about what art is and what art can be. And in a lot of ways, what we've talked about throughout the semester is we've defined art in this kind of constantly changing environment of art and art understanding that art is kind of a moving target and it's constantly changing and evolving. What you have is people that are discussing what art can be and who gets to decide what art is, right? Art is a collective experience. It's a reflection on the community. It's a reflection on society. It's a reflection on understanding, who am I, why am I here, where am I going, or at least it's an ability for us to be able to think about those things for ourselves. And so what you have is people that generally wouldn't have that experience or wouldn't even know that they would want that experience now having that experience. And so this in some ways the art museum or the artist going to the people and finding that ability to connect with them and bring people together. And he does this, throughout his projects. He normally takes something and then he quote unquote wraps it or changes the context of it in some way. And so you have the Reichstag, which is the government building in Germany. He wraps that in 1972. And again, it's only up for a couple of weeks and it's gone forever. And then you have a bridge in Paris, Pont Neuf, that he wraps, which, I mean, if you walk across Pont Neuf, every day, you don't really think about it, but all of a sudden it's covered in canvas and it has a new context and new meaning. And all of a sudden you start talking about what this actually means and how is this, what's the artistic relevance of this? What's it meaning? Is this really even art itself? And so you actually have people coming together who generally people that feel isolated and estranged in this contemporary world that are coming together and actually having this collective experience. And so it's about the investigation of who am I, why am I here, where am I going, and for people to be able to think about those and come to their own understanding. But it's also about this idea of community, bringing people together. This is another project that he did called The Wall. This is more of a commentary on communism and the connections, right? The building of walls that we generally tend to build. This one he does just surrounded islands, and so what he does is he goes to Miami and he surrounds these islands with this this canvas. And what he normally does is he goes to each community. He goes, in this particular one, he goes to Miami, the local people. Mainly he went to the University of Miami and asked the students and seen if they wanted to help him with an art project. And so they said, sure, that sounds cool. And they went out there and they worked to put this together. It was up for 2 weeks. He took 430 workers, wrapped 9 islands, and then it was gone right after 2 weeks. But again, as people drive past this, as they start to see these pink little islands that are wrapped, it provides new meaning, new insights, a new experience to our environment, to think about our connection to our environment in a different way. He doesn't always wrap things, although that's kind of the stereotype for Christo as he wraps things. This one, he puts umbrellas out in the Northern California landscape. Again, something that if you drive by every day, you just kind of start to take for granted. And when you put umbrellas up, right, millions of little umbrellas up, it probably wasn't millions, it was probably, I guess it was 3,100, right? That was a hyperbole, 3,100 umbrellas across the landscape. you start to experience it something different. And this one had a sister project that he did in Japan. The umbrellas in Japan were blue, and the ones in the United States were yellow. Kind of an East meets West project. But again, to provide this new experience to engage people within art. This one, as far as I know, this is his most expensive work of art. This one cost him in 2015 dollars, right, for adjusted for inflation, $45 million in order to do. And again, it's only up for a couple of days, and then it's gone forever. And the question that a lot of people have is, well, how does he come up with this amount of money? And what he does, he sells his designs, as we see here. He'll sell this. He'll sell the fabric. Like, for instance, for the running fence, people ask, well, what do you do with all that cloth? Do you just keep it in storage? And for some of it, he does keep in storage. But for some of it, he cuts up and he then sells to fund future projects. And so, but for him, mainly what he does is he finds out how much a project is going to cost him. And then he raises enough money in order to fund the project, and then that's pretty much it. For him, it's mainly about creating art, creating the experience. This is one that he did in New York City called The Gates. What he does here is he wraps Central Park in New York. This one took him about 20 years in order to get approved. So you think about New York being kind of I don't know, artsy, or, at least kind of open-minded about art. But New York took 20 years for him to get this approved. So everywhere he goes, he's finding the same opposition, trying to get permits, trying to get permission, trying to get people to think about whether this is art or not. And then they go, and as you see here, they go and experience it, right? And so it's mainly about the experience that he's creating for the people to see something new, or to see something, I guess, old, but in a new way. It's up for 16 days, and then it's gone, right? And this is one that he did more recently in 2016. What he does is he puts these cubes off to the water here. This was in Lake Iseo in Italy, and there are several islands that surround this Italian coast. And he puts these cubes down, and then he wraps the cubes, and so people can go and walk on water. All right, so it's kind of providing this new experience, providing a new way to think about the world and how we connect to the world in a different way. This video kind of gives you an overview of this project, but also gives an overview of all of his projects. And I like to show the artists because it shows their humanity. Sometimes as we read them within a textbook or within a lecture, we tend to see them differently. We just see them in an academic way. I like to show them more in a human sort of way, to show their humanity.
Lake Iseo is about 60 miles east of Milan. And in that lake, there's a small island home to about 2,000 people. It's a population that's totally dependent on boats and ferries. And Christo, who's wrapped the Reichstag building in Berlin, who's outlined whole islands with bright pink cloth, got an idea.
The project is now another 7 months to go. They will walk on the water.
They'll walk across the water?
Yeah, they literally walk on the water.
On a path of yellow fabric on top of 200,000 plastic cubes. This is the first project Christo will do without his wife, Jean-Claude. She passed away in 2009. And like their past projects, the floating piers will be in place for a limited time.
This project will never be repeated.
Christo and his team will disassemble it after about 2 weeks.
When the project is happening, this very precious time, for a few days, the people know that they're at the site of something, because every human is unique in the world, and they like to witness something unique.
What's also unique is how these multi-million-dollar projects are financed. Early on, Christo and Jean-Claude decided they needed to do things differently, out of necessity. He says collectors and dealers are notoriously slow payers.
We cannot say to our workers on Friday, we cannot pay them because Mr. Smith, who bought, is not paid yet.
In 1982, Christo and Jean-Claude formed CVJ Corporation, headquartered in Delaware. It sells Christo's original works of art from the 1950s to the present. Drawings, collages, fabric. And there's a subsidiary for each project. Right now, Christo is working on 3 of them, including the floating piers.
cutting or sewing the fabric was very complex.
Christo also buys back his artwork if he sees it on the market and thinks it's undervalued.
We're now the biggest owners of works of art we have.
These projects often take years. It took 24 years for Christo and Jean-Claude to get permission from New York City to do the gates, from then Mayor Michael Bloomberg.
Has it gotten easier as you've become better known, as your projects have become better known, to get past the regulatory hurdles? Are people more willing to have your artwork?
No. I cannot believe it, how difficult it is. Never. I'm not masochist. I would love to have an easy way.
Christo keeps busy. When we spoke, he was days away from a trip to Abu Dhabi to work on another of the 3 projects he's juggling right now. Christo is 80, and as our interview ended, we asked him if he has even more projects planned.
Jean-Claude was saying, we are so young and very easily excited, and if we have a new idea, we tell you right away. And if I have a new idea, probably we'll learn right away.
David Gura, Bloomberg, New York.
So just to connect this to kind of an overarching theme as we begin to close here, what propaganda does, right? As we think about the differences between art and propaganda, propaganda generally tells us who we are and what our identity is. And what art seeks to do is it seeks to provide an investigation for us. It provides an opportunity for us to think about this. Provides a way for us to be empowered to think about the world a little bit differently, right? Where propaganda tends to kind of color over or be kind of heavy-handed in the way that we should see the world. Art tries to be a little bit more open and letting us to kind of come to our own conclusions for ourselves, and we certainly do see that within minimalism and Christo's works here, right? As we are invited to come and interact and experience with it. But you can see from that the video that it's still an ongoing struggle. Even though he's well known, one of the most famous contemporary artists out there, it's still very difficult for him to get things approved for whatever reason, right? I don't know why people are so opposed to it. It's probably a little bit more complex than we can discuss here, right? Different places probably have different concerns. This one is a work that he's currently working on. What he wants to do is he wants to wrap the Arkansas River. And you can't really wrap a river, right? But what you can do is you can put, you have these ropes that are going to be from one side of the river to the other, and then he's going to interweave this cloth in between them, and then people can kind of, raft underneath it to experience this particular work. But the people in Colorado are not in favor of this work, and they've been opposing it for years. And so the struggle goes on. And so, again, to think about that, why do you think people have such a struggle with art, right? What is it about art that people are opposed to in whatever way, right? And it's not as though the art today is vastly, more opposed than it was in the past, right? In the past, art was opposed just as much, right? As we think about Michelangelo, we think about him being the pinnacle of art, but in his day, he was considered very controversial, right? He was doing a lot of elements within his art that people were shocked by. They felt that he was being a little bit too risque, and so they didn't like his art, at least at first. We see similar ideas with Picasso, right? Picasso wasn't generally widely accepted, or Pollock not widely accepted, and so artists always been struggled to adapt into society or to be accepted by society. And so then the question is, why is that, right? Why is propaganda so widely kind of, embraced to some extent, whereas art is kind of seen with more of a skeptical lens, right? And it's kind of interesting because art's not trying to pose anything or impose anything. It's just trying to get you to think for yourself. And so something to kind of consider beyond this lecture and this class. I wanted to leave you with the idea of kind of where we're at within the world today, the new term that's kind of emerging. This has come around, I think, in 2017. I think it was the word of the year, 2016, 2017 word of the year. And we're still kind of living in this world today. And we particularly see this today in 2020, and I want you to think about how this might relate to art and propaganda as we leave this semester. What we see with post-truth is this new era, right? Post-truth has much more of a casual relationship with facts and evidence, and that's kind of the new flavor that we're experiencing today. This is the academic definition of post-truth. It's defined as relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. And so data is less relevant to people than feeling. This cartoon down below here gives you a sense of, in the old days with science, you had Descartes who says, I think, therefore I am. And then the post-truth days, you have, I believe, therefore I'm right. And I just want you to think about that sense. Are we becoming more, grounded in our own view of the world, right? Our own version of dogmatism. And then we're losing that touch with what truth actually is, or what facts actually mean. Something to consider. And one of the last articles I wanted you to read this semester was just a newspaper article or that I found online that was about post-truth and the millennials' experience with post-truth. And I just wanted to read through a couple of quotes for your consideration, for you to think about. Therefore, a virtual world enables both extreme distortion and exposure. Think about dogmatism and distorting truth and ideas. To millennials, the truth is variable and constantly shifting. This is a central idea to the postmodern worldview that millennials learn in high school and at university. In today's world, many will only pay attention to what agrees with them. In the 1960s and 70s, a world of 3 major television networks in the U.S., you could not do this as easily. Absolute truth with a capital T is a bit more rare sight nowadays, even more so than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And so now you get the sense that all ideas are subjective, right? And so then, again, that leads into that feeling of uncertainty in the world today. It leads to that feeling of ambiguity of who am I? What does that identity mean when there are no more truths out there? And then how does that lead to people grasping at different elements within society to find certain ideas within truth, right? And again, another quote from that article, just for you to consider. Millennials are pioneers, right? So again, we hear a lot of negativity about millennials, and I didn't want to be negative. Focusing on some of the things that we can take away. Millennials are pioneers in sorting through what seems to be universal truth and the individualized, right? Capital T truth versus lower T truth. Subjective concept of truth, right? The individualized subjective concept of truth. They thrive on information and can be frantically analytical. They are aware of the fine line between the two varieties of truth, yet they often flirt with the frontier between the two. The sense of right and wrong differs greatly from that of the modern boomer generation. They often justify their actions based on their personal understanding of the truth. In the mind of the millennial, the truth is obtained through access to information, right? So they can come to their own conclusion as well. And I wonder how this relates to what minimalist artists are seeking to do, right? To find truth, to find the parameters of truth, rather than asserting truth and suggesting that someone knows absolute truth. But then the idea is asserting absolute truth, but it's not absolute truth. It's a subjective truth that they're pushing on you, whether that's, nationalism or the ideas of gender identity that we've talked about. Generally, those ideas in the past have been promoted as capital T truths, right? If we think about gender, how women should behave was perceived as a capital T truth, but then as we start to pull away the layers of that, we start to see that more as a lower T truth. It's more of a social construct. And so the main idea that we have today in this post-truth world is, how do we find truth with all of the uncertainty as we start to remove a lot of the social constructs? Where can we find the actual truth? And that's where I'm gonna leave you this semester, is how do we find that? How do we move past these ideas of inception, these ideas that have been forced onto us, so that we can understand the world and understand our experience, to understand our identity in a truthful way, right? And in a clear way, have that clear vision. I wanted to return to this quote. I shared this quote with you earlier in the semester, and just to get you to think about, as you move on, what should you do? What should be your focus? Most people don't know the answer to the question, how are you? How do you feel? The reason why they don't know is that they're so busy feeling what they're supposed to feel, thinking what they're supposed to think, that they never get down to examining their own deepest feelings. With authority figures like teachers and professors telling us what to think and how to feel, many of us are busy playing roles, fulfilling other people's expectations. As Republicans, we think what other Republicans think. As Catholics, we think what other Catholics think, and so on. Not many of us ask ourselves, how do I feel? What do I think? And wait for the answer. And so as we think about moving beyond, those are some questions that are important for us to be able to answer. How do I feel? What do I think about this? Not what am I supposed to think about this? What's the social construct for me to think about this? But how am I supposed to think? And that's a much more anxiety-driven world. That's true, and that's going to lead to some uncertainty and doubt and all of that. But that might lead to actual growth and a greater understanding of what truth is. And with any type of growth, there's going to be some growing pains and uncertainty. But within that uncertainty is great strength and overcoming to try to piece together and to find our own aspect of truth. And just to get back to the image that I shared with you as we were taking a look at religion and religious extremism, I shared with you this photo by William Anders, who took this from orbiting the moon. As we think about the world today, as we think about our place in it, where are we? Where should we place ourselves? All right, how should we view our identity in the world? What should we turn to as sources of comfort and sources of truth? Because there's a lot of things out there that are promising truth and certainty. There's a lot of things out there that are promising to give you a label to make you feel better. But a part of that is, part of our reason for being here is to find that label for ourselves, right? To find that, to discover that connection for ourselves. And so as we think about connectivity, who am I within the world? How do I connect with others? We need to start thinking about, what is our relationship to one another? What should our relationship be? How should we see others? As we start to understand ourselves and we start to think about, what is our relationship to everyone else? And so to leave you this semester, that's a question for us to all to consider. What are we? How do we remove the philosophies of man, so to speak, and think about what actually is truth? How should we see ourselves within the world?